What if I told you that a superstar lawyer should probably do their own office cleaning? At first glance, this sounds absurd. After all, why would someone earning hundreds of dollars an hour waste time pushing a mop? Shouldn't they focus entirely on their highly lucrative legal work? The answer lies in one of the most misunderstood concepts in economics: comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is one of those ideas that feels counterintuitive, even though it's been reshaping economies and guiding decision-making for centuries. On the surface, the principle sounds simple. Focus on what you're relatively better at compared to others, and trade to fill in the gaps. But this simplicity often leads to misconceptions, such as the idea that the better party should always do everything. In reality, comparative advantage encourages us to consider the entire system of resources, time, and opportunity costs, not just individual ability. Now, you might wonder, why does this matter? What's really at stake here? The truth is, understanding comparative advantage isn't just about economics or trade agreements. It's about transforming how we make decisions in every sphere of life. From choosing the right career to delegating tasks effectively, mastering this principle can mean the difference between exponential growth and stagnation. It's the reason why some companies skyrocket while others fail. It's why countries thrive or miss out on their full potential. And on a smaller scale, it could help you stop wasting time on the wrong priorities. So, let's dive deeper and uncover the real power behind this deceptively simple idea. To truly understand how comparative advantage works, let's start with the timeless example made famous by Ricardo. Imagine two countries in the early 19th century, England and Portugal. Portugal is ideal for producing wine. It has a sunny climate and rich vineyards. England, on the other hand, excels at making quality cloth. Now, if both countries focus on what they're best at, Portugal making wine, England making cloth, and then trade with each other, both nations end up with more wine and more cloth than if they had tried to produce everything themselves. That's comparative advantage at its finest, leveraging relative strengths to create mutual gains through specialization and trade. But Ricardo's theory gets more interesting when we put it to the test. What happens if Portugal becomes better at everything? Let's say Portugal develops advanced textile machinery, and suddenly they can produce both wine and cloth more efficiently than England. At first glance, it seems like England will lose out entirely. Why would Portugal bother trading with a less efficient partner? Here's the key revelation: absolute advantage, being the best at something, isn't the same as comparative advantage. Even if Portugal can produce both goods more efficiently, the opportunity cost of making wine versus making cloth still matters. If Portugal can make 5 barrels of wine in the same time it takes to produce 1 roll of cloth, compared to England's ability to make 2 barrels of wine for 1 roll of cloth, Portugal should still focus on wine. Why? Because for every roll of cloth Portugal tries to produce, it forgoes the chance to make a much greater amount of wine, its more valuable resource. Meanwhile, England's opportunity cost is far lower, so it should focus on cloth. This insight drives home a central lesson. Comparative advantage explains why trade isn't just beneficial for the weaker partner, but allows both sides to come out ahead, even when one is more efficient across the board. Ricardo's example highlights why specialization based on relative strengths, not absolute dominance, is so critical. Now let's take this lesson out of the classroom and into the modern world. Consider the trade relationship between China and the United States. China is often said to have a manufacturing advantage, producing everything from electronics to apparel at lower costs than the US. But the US maintains a comparative advantage in areas like specialized labor and capital-intensive industries. Think aerospace, pharmaceuticals, and software. Despite China's dominance in manufacturing, its opportunity cost for entering these specialized sectors would be immense compared to the United States' ability to produce such goods. That's why global trade thrives. Even when one nation appears strongest across the board, comparative advantage ensures there's room for mutually beneficial exchange. Let's revisit our earlier example about the superstar lawyer cleaning their own office. On the surface, it's tempting to argue that the lawyer should hire someone else. After all, their time is far more valuable. But to really understand why, we need to dig into the concept of opportunity cost. Imagine that this lawyer earns $500 an hour drafting contracts. Cleaning the office takes them an hour, meaning they're essentially giving up $500 of potential income for that task. Now, if hiring a cleaner costs $50 an hour, there's a massive gap here, a $450 net gain, if someone else does the task while the lawyer focuses on their legal work. This is where opportunity cost shows its power. It's not just about whether you can do a task, but whether doing it is the best use of your time. But let's stress test this idea. What happens as we adjust the numbers? What if the lawyer earns $100 an hour instead of $500? Suddenly, the math changes. If they're giving up $100 for every hour spent cleaning, while it still costs $50 to hire someone, the net gain shrinks to just $50. At $75 an hour, the economics narrow further, only a $25 gain. Below $50 an hour, the calculation flips entirely. Now it's cheaper for the lawyer to clean their own office rather than outsource it. This exercise highlights a critical insight. Delegation isn't just for the rich and time-starved. It's a principle rooted in productivity and opportunity cost. Even highly productive individuals benefit from outsourcing tasks when the cost of delegation is far less than the value they can create elsewhere. It's why executives hire assistants, why businesses invest in specialist employees, and why professionals spend on tools to optimize daily workflows. The broader takeaway here is simple but profound. Focus your energy on what only you can do best and delegate the rest. Whether you're a $500 an hour lawyer, a small business owner, or an aspiring entrepreneur, this principle applies universally. It's the economic law of comparative advantage applied to your personal productivity, and it's how you reclaim time, drive growth, and maximize the impact of what you do best. Now let's enter a futuristic scenario, one that's becoming all too real: the rise of AI and automation. Imagine a world where machines can do everything humans can, but faster, cheaper, and without error. Machines write code, analyze data, deliver packages, and even cook gourmet meals, all better than their human counterparts. At first glance, it seems like humans are doomed in this automated utopia, replaced and rendered irrelevant. But what happens when we subject this situation to the lens of comparative advantage? Let's stress test it. If machines truly are better at everything, what roles do humans have left to play? Initially, it feels like there's no room for competition. But here's where the insight gets interesting. Even when machines outperform humans across every metric, comparative advantage doesn't disappear. It just shifts. Imagine that machines are exceptional at everything: coding, manufacturing, writing, and logistics. Meanwhile, humans still have relative strengths in areas like creativity, adaptability, moral judgment, and interpersonal connection. The opportunity costs of human time change drastically. For instance, a psychologist might provide a deeply personal therapy session that no machine, no matter how advanced, could replicate authentically. The automation of routine tasks, like scheduling appointments or analyzing historical patient data, only amplifies the psychologist's ability to focus on the high-value aspect of their work, the human connection. The machine's absolute advantage in administrative tasks completely aligns with the comparative advantage of the human specializing where machines can't tread. But let's ramp up the test. What if we eventually reach a point where AI can replicate or even enhance human creativity and emotional intelligence? Now, machines might start dabbling in traditionally human domains, like art or therapy. Even then, comparative advantage holds the answer. The relevant question becomes what humans should stop doing entirely and what they should double down on. Perhaps in this machine-dominated future, humans focus on ultra-niche, hyper-personalized, or artisanal roles that still hold unique value, even if they cost more to produce. Comparative advantage doesn't disappear. It adapts to the new reality of what's scarce and what's abundant. Here's the key insight. Even in a world of perfect automation, comparative advantage still matters. It's not about competing on the same playing field, but about redefining which field makes sense in the first place. Machines might dominate production, but humans can thrive by reallocating their time to areas where technology enhances, rather than replaces, their contributions. If anything, the rise of automation makes understanding comparative advantage even more critical. It's how humanity will carve out a meaningful role in an increasingly automated world. Now let's bring comparative advantage into your daily life, specifically how you manage your time. Whether you're a student juggling assignments, a professional navigating a packed schedule, or even someone trying to pick up a new hobby, the choices you make around how to spend your time mirror the same trade-offs we see in global trade. The principle of comparative advantage could be the secret weapon for boosting your personal productivity. Here's how it works. Let's say you're deciding how to split your time. Should you stick with your core skills, like writing reports or coding, or should you invest time into learning something entirely new, like public speaking? The trick to applying comparative advantage here lies in the hidden costs. Every hour you spend developing a new skill comes at the cost of what else you could be doing, and the value you might have been creating with your existing expertise. For example, if you're an excellent programmer earning $100 an hour freelancing, spending 20 hours learning graphic design could mean losing $2,000 in potential income. But what if that new skill eventually opens up even bigger opportunities down the line? This is where things get interesting. To figure out whether to specialize further or diversify, you need to evaluate your opportunity cost. In other words, ask yourself, what are you giving up by learning this new skill? And is the payoff worth it in the long run? Let's stress test this idea with a specific example. Imagine you're an accountant who's killer at financial modeling, but struggles with presenting those ideas confidently to clients. You could double down on what you're already great at, becoming an elite financial modeler. But what if investing 10 hours in public speaking training makes you twice as effective in your client presentations, leading to more contracts and higher fees? Suddenly, the decision depends on weighing how much improvement you can expect in the new skill versus how much momentum you might lose by stepping away from your current strength. The key insight? It's not about specializing or diversifying. It's about timing and strategy. Specialize when your current strengths yield exponential returns for every hour you invest. Diversify when adding a complementary skill raises your overall value far more, either by unlocking new opportunities or by solving critical weaknesses. Skill development isn't just a straight line. It's a decision tree where each choice shapes your future potential differently. To visualize this, imagine a decision tree for your own skill development. Each branch represents a decision. Should you refine your strengths or build complementary skills? At each step, ask yourself 2 questions. 1. What's the opportunity cost of focusing here? 2. Does this choice create future opportunities that outweigh short-term losses? By systematically applying comparative advantage to your time management and skill development, you stop making reactive decisions and start strategically investing in your future. While comparative advantage is a powerful idea, it's not perfect. Like any model, it has its breaking points, and understanding where it falters is just as important as leveraging where it succeeds. So, where does comparative advantage fall apart? Let's dive into 3 critical areas: transportation costs, trade barriers, and long-term dynamics. Transportation costs. Comparative advantage assumes frictionless movement of goods between regions or countries. But in the real world, moving products isn't free. Take an example from global agriculture. A country might have a comparative advantage in producing fresh fruits. But if shipping those fruits requires expensive refrigeration and long transit times, the cost savings vanish. A study published by the World Bank highlights that for trade in lower value goods, a 1% change in transportation costs results in a corresponding 1% change in trade volume. This sensitivity shows how critical transportation expenses can be in erasing any comparative advantage. Next, trade barriers and strategic independence. Tariffs, quotas, and subsidies are often deployed to protect domestic industries, directly disrupting the natural flow of comparative advantage. For example, despite Bangladesh having a strong comparative advantage in producing textiles, the United States imposes tariffs on imports that raise the effective cost of Bangladeshi goods, reducing their ability to compete. Consider industries like semiconductors. Countries like the US may choose to produce semiconductors domestically, even if it's more costly than importing from places with comparative advantages, like Taiwan. Why? Because the stakes aren't purely economic. Ensuring control over a critical resource can outweigh any immediate trade benefits. In cases of national security or critical supply chains, comparative advantage is often sidelined. Finally, long-term dynamic effects. Comparative advantage operates on the assumption that industries and economies are relatively static, but history shows they rarely are. Look at Portugal after the Methuen Treaty of 1703. The country's focus on wine production, encouraged by its trade agreement with England, caused its domestic industry to stifle innovation in textiles, leaving it less competitive over time. Economists refer to this as the Dutch disease phenomenon. Short-term gains in one area can lead to long-term stagnation in others. Similarly, for individuals, over-specializing in a fading industry without diversifying skills can leave you stuck when the market changes. If we map these breaking points visually, they're like stress thresholds on a graph. At low levels of cost or interference, the model of comparative advantage holds strong, leading to mutual gains. But as transportation costs rise, trade barriers strengthen, or strategic considerations come into play, the benefits start to erode. Eventually, you reach a tipping point where acting on comparative advantage no longer makes sense. Awareness of these limits allows us to adapt and pivot when the model shows its cracks. The takeaway here? Comparative advantage is a tool, not a universal law. It's immensely powerful under the right conditions, but fails in scenarios where friction, rigidity, or long-term vulnerabilities dominate. Recognizing these breaking points isn't a flaw in the model. It's what makes economic decision-making much more nuanced than a simple formula. So what's the real value of understanding comparative advantage? It's more than just an economic theory. It's a lens for making better decisions. Whether you're managing your career, building a business, or deciding how to spend your Saturday afternoon. By applying this principle, we can stop focusing on just what we're best at and start optimizing for what truly matters. Long-term gains, systemic efficiency, and opportunity costs. But don't just take these ideas at face value, really put them to work. Here are 4 critical thinking questions to consider. 1. How would you determine whether to outsource a task if you're better at it than everyone else? Think about how much time and energy you could save if you delegated that task, and what value you could create instead. Remember, being the best at something doesn't always mean you should be the one doing it. 2. Can you identify a situation where ignoring comparative advantage might actually be the right choice? For example, national security, core business tasks, or developing personal passions might be areas where strategic independence takes precedence over efficiency. 3. How might the principle of comparative advantage influence your career choices? Where should you double down on existing strengths versus diversifying into complementary skills? Are you spending your time where your opportunities are most valuable? 4. In a world of increasing automation, how can you position yourself using comparative advantage? As machines take on more and more tasks, how can you focus on areas where human creativity, connection, and adaptability provide an edge? Ultimately, comparative advantage isn't just about trade or productivity. It's about finding the most impactful way to use your resources, talents, and time. It's a framework that scales from global economies to the choices we make every day. So, ask yourself, how can you take this idea and use it to reshape the way you approach life's biggest and smallest decisions?